There's a reason so many people today are saying, I understand my trauma, but my body did not get the memo. In the last few years, mental health conversations have shifted away from insight alone and toward nervous system repair, embodied processing, and bottom-up healing. And at the center of that shift is a quiet but powerful body of work that blends neuroscience with somatic intelligence. Deep Brain Reorienting with Alexander Technique Interweaves, developed, taught, and refined by Martin Warner. This is not just another trauma method. It is a way of working, a style rooted in precision, restraint, and deep respect for the body's own intelligence. Who is Martin Warner, you ask? Well, Martin Warner brings something unusual to the trauma therapy world. Over 4 decades of somatic expertise, grounded in the Alexander Technique, combined with advanced training in deep brain reorienting, originally developed by psychiatrist Dr. Frank Horrigan. Where many trauma approaches emphasize intervention, Warner emphasizes orientation. Where others push for emotional catharsis, he teaches waiting. Where some techniques rely on technique-heavy protocols, Warner's work is defined by subtlety and listening. His contribution is not about adding more, it's about doing less, but more precisely. Deep Brain Reorienting. So, Deep Brain Reorienting, or DBR, is based on a simple but profound insight. Trauma begins before emotion, before narrative, before cognition. At the moment of shock, whether from threat, attachment rupture, or sudden loss, the brainstem initiates an orienting process. That response often gets frozen or interrupted, leaving the nervous system locked in readiness long after the danger has passed. DBR works before fear, before panic, before meaning-making, by tracking the earliest physiological signals of shock in the body. Martin Warner did not change that foundation. He deepened it. What makes Warner's DBR Alexander Technique Interweave work different? Well, what distinguishes it in Warner's approach is specifically the integration of the Alexander Technique in Interweaves, not as a technique layered on top of DBR, but as a way of attending to the body while DBR unfolds. In Warner's work, DBR becomes less about processing and more about allowing the nervous system to reorganize itself. Key features of his style include extreme sensitivity to neck, head, and orienting tension, emphasis on inhibition rather than activation, minimal verbal intrusion, respect for micro movements and pauses, avoidance of emotional flooding, a deep trust in the client's self-regulatory capacity. This is trauma work for people who don't want to be pushed. So what is the Alexander Technique and how does it influence the development of Warner's work? So the Alexander Technique is not therapy. It's an educational discipline that helps people recognize and release habitual patterns of tension, particularly in the head, neck, and spine. Warner's genius is recognizing that these same regions are central to the trauma response. Rather than correcting posture or movement, Warner uses Alexander principles to help clients notice how they brace without knowing it, release effort rather than apply effort, allow the head and neck to orient freely, reduce the body's expectation of threat. In DBR AT sessions, the Alexander Technique acts as a silent guide, helping the nervous system feel safe enough to complete what was once interrupted. So what does a session feel like? A session with a Warner-trained DBR AT practitioner often feels quiet. There's no pressure to relieve trauma, no demand for storytelling, no insistence on emotional expression. Instead, the client is invited to bring gentle attention to a trigger or memory, notice where the body orients or tightens, stay with sensations without interpretation, Allow the body to lead the pace. Clients often report something surprising: relief without trauma. This aligns perfectly with current conversations in mental health spaces about gentle trauma processing, capacity-based healing, and avoiding re-traumatization. So why is this work resonating right now? Well, in 2025, it seems that people are tired of pushing themselves to heal. It seems like the zeitgeist is asking for nervous system safety, subtlety over intensity, methods that don't overwhelm, and therapies that honor bodily consent. Warner's DBR AT training appeals especially to clinicians and clients who say, I don't need more insight. I need my body to settle. This work speaks directly to those who have tried talk therapy, standard cognitive behavioral therapy, insight-oriented analysis, even other somatic methods, and still feel on edge. Martin Warner's Interweave training is known for being precise, experiential, and non-performative. Trainees have often remarked on the absence of hype, the emphasis on felt experience, the slowing down of clinical reflexes, learning to not intervene prematurely. Warner teaches clinicians to trust sequence, timing, and the nervous system's own intelligence, skills that are increasingly valued as the field moves away from aggressive trauma processing. So, who is particularly suited for DBR AT work? So far, it looks like promising results are consistent for those with complex trauma, developmental and attachment trauma, shock without clear narrative, clients overwhelmed by other methods, therapists seeking refinement, not novelty. It is not flashy, it is not fast, and that's exactly why it works. Martin Warner's contribution to deep brain reorienting is not about invention, it's about attunement. By weaving Alexander technique principles into DBR, he offers a way of working that honors the body's pace, the nervous system's wisdom, and the quiet moments when real change happens. In a world that keeps asking us to do more, heal faster, and push harder, this work reminds us that sometimes the most profound healing comes from learning how to stop interfering. So to learn more about Martin Warner's work, I will post his website in the comments. Now, the work of deep brain reorienting is gradually becoming more known here in the United States. Dr. Corrigan, who developed deep brain reorienting after initially training in Brainspotting, is based in Scotland, and Martin Warner is also based in the UK. So in the world of trauma therapy, there have been similar techniques that I personally call it, they're kind of in the EMDR-esque lens because they utilize either dual hemispheric stimulation or bilateral stimulation, utilizing eyes in the interventions. Other techniques that have been also emerging that in my kind of the way I call them sort of the next wave of the next wave after EMDR. Those are just my words, is something called accelerated resolution therapy, which is a form of also using eye movements, but really integrates more visualizations. So someone who's a really good visualizer might find that accelerated resolution therapy or ART can be rather beneficial. Now, ART does not have the evidence-based status because, well, EMDR didn't have evidence-based status always. It took a while. So it takes a certain amount of data to be given that designation. But in the meantime, there is ART as well as something called brain wiring recursive therapy. And it is also out of the UK, out of England, and has practitioners. When I look on their directory site, practitioners in the UK, Australia, South Africa. So it also, similar to ART or ART, utilizes visualization as well as bilateral stimulation, but it does not use a light bar or any kind of system that has you actually move the eyes, but it still finds a way to do that hemispheric back and forth, for lack of a better word. So again, some of the modalities, they seem to be, they sort of take off in a certain geographical area initially, or they take off all at once in, say, the English-speaking world, if that's the original source point is an English-speaking clinical developer, similar to what EMDR was. EMDR was developed by Dr. Francine Shapiro in the United States. So with deep brain reorienting, it's sort of crossing the pond, as well as brain wiring recursive therapy. So other things to consider too is that methodologies are also, in terms of them being applied in a clinical setting, there's also the variable of licensing boards, because in the United States, licensing boards there's 50 of them, and they are not the same as whatever licensing authority there is in the UK, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. So over time, I think with the mass media being what it is, I think eventually the other therapies that are emerging will become more well known here if you're in the US or Canada, but information about them is available now. So in the meantime, these are the options, because for the longest time, talk therapy was kind of all we had, but that's not always the case now.